This is the one and only meeting this month of the City of Tempe Hearing Officer. I'm going to go ahead and read something into the record before we jump right into our agenda this afternoon. The City of Tempe Hearing Officer is authorized by Arizona Revised Statutes and the City of Tempe Zoning and Development Code. The hearing officer has the duty to carry out both the provisions and the intent of the Zoning and Development Code and the Tempe City Code. The hearing officer is granted the authority through ZDC Section 6-310 to conduct public hearings to decide upon the abatement of code violations occurring on properties within the City of Tempe. Code violations include, but aren't limited to, deteriorated landscaping, inoperable vehicles, deteriorated structures, storage of junk or refuse, or deteriorated swimming pools. And abatement actions are brought before the hearing officer by the city's Code Compliance Division, typically after numerous attempts at contacting the property owner to obtain voluntary compliance with the code. The hearing officer may issue an order directing the owner, occupant, rental agent, property manager, or other responsible person to abate a code violation or authorize the city to abate the condition giving rise to that violation. And the cost of abatement is the responsibility of the owner of the property where the violation occurred and may be collected as an assessment against the property found to be in violation. On today's agenda, we have 6 items. We have a set of minutes and 5 property abatements. Any property owner who's aggrieved by a decision of the hearing officer may file an appeal within 14 calendar days after the hearing officer has made a decision. As such, the deadline for appealing any decision rendered today is 5 p.m. on December 31st, 2019. And abatement appeals are heard by the Board of Adjustment, after which they may also be appealed to the Superior Court of Arizona. And the property owner has 14 days to either file an appeal or bring the property into compliance with the city codes. And if, excuse me, if neither of these things happen by this date, this same December 31st date, the property will be abated by the city. To make introductions, my name's Vanessa McDonald. I'm the hearing officer, and joining me from Community Development are Shelby Meyer and Drew Yoakum. The first item on our agenda this afternoon is a set of minutes from the hearing we had on November 19th, 2019. I had a chance to review those minutes in the packet that I was given, and I believe they accurately reflect what took place at that hearing. So I'm going to go ahead and approve the minutes of November 19th, 2019. Agenda item number 2 is a request for approval to abate public nuisance items at the Hall property located at 1248 West 10th Place. The applicant is City of Tempe Code Compliance, and the address is 1248 West 10th Place. Mr. Lara Reyes.
Good evening. Name is Andres Lara Reyes, City of Tempe Code Compliance Division. Him to request an 180-day open abatement at the property at 1248 West 10th Place, Tempe, Arizona 52281. Owner of the property is Charles Hall. This property has been in violation since June of this year. Several notices were mailed out to the property, also re-inspection fees and a citation. This is for trash, litter and debris, and over high grass and weeds. As of this morning, the property remains in violation. None of the 2 violations have been addressed.
These are the photographs that I was just handed? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And you said it's been, the correspondence with the owner has been since June?
June.
And has
right.
there been any responsiveness on their part? Or?
No.
Okay. So they've been received adequate notice, have been
right.
unresponsive, and
re-inspection fees, 1 citation. This is one property that we normally file at least once a year.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not, even though it's not terribly bad, we're still getting complaints.
Sure. Yeah, and from the photographs that I was given from September 30th to the ones that I was just handed today, there is no...
Right, there's no changes.
No change.
Or improvements, right.
In fact, if anything, it's just gotten worse.
Right.
So, okay, is there a member of the public today wishing to speak on agenda item number 2? I don't see anyone here, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing portion for agenda item number 2. I agree with your assessment, given the condition today, the condition, a couple months ago, and the fact that you've been attempting to reach this property owner now for 6 or 7 months. I'm going to approve your abatement for 180 days, located in CE 194523. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 3 is a request for approval to abate public nuisance items at the Villaseñor property located at 1876 East Dunbar Drive. Applicant is City of Tempe, code compliance. Mr. Glab.
Good evening. Michael Glab, Residential Code Inspector for the City of Tempe. I'm here today in reference to this property at 1876 East Dunbar Drive. Excuse me. In May of 2019, my office received a complaint related to a deteriorated landscape at this property. I responded and observed that there was a violation of deteriorated landscape and mailed a notice to the property owners. In June of this year, I followed up at the property, saw little to no change, and mailed a second copy to the property owners. In July, I followed up and observed little to no change, and then posted a notice to the structure itself. In August of 2019, I followed up and saw little to no change, so then I issued citations to the property owners. In September of this year, I did attend court where the defendants were found responsible. I then had a face-to-face discussion with the property owner in the lobby of the courtroom discussing the options for the property. In October and November of this year, I followed up at the property and saw little to no change at the property, and so I sought remedy through this process, the abatement process. On December 6th of this year, I did receive an email from the property owner advising that he was now planning to grow grass in the property. However, I believe you now have photographs in front of you taken today showing the state of the property. At this time, I'm seeking a 180-day open abatement period for this property for a deteriorated landscape.
Yeah, I think if he was going to grow grass, especially ryegrass, it would have been, planted and definitely grown by now. Any other type of grass would not be growing this time of year, because that's when Bermuda and other types go dormant. Is there any member of, so this has been since May?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a long time and little to no responsiveness on the part of the property owner. And again, I was just given photographs as of today, just a few hours ago, and the property is unchanged from the ones that were provided to me from November 13th. No member of the public is here this afternoon wanting to speak on agenda item number 3. So I'm going to, are you requesting 180 days or just a regular?
180.
180 days?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and approve your 180-day abatement for the nuisance items at the Villaseñor property at 1876 East Dunbar, contained in application CE 193519. Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is a request for abatement of public nuisance items at the Smith property. This is located at 209 West Southern Avenue. The applicant is City of Tempe. And Mr. White, long time
Hi.
no see.
My name is Marv White, Code Inspector of the City of Tempe. I'm here today requesting a 180-day open abatement for the property located at 209 West Southern Avenue due to the fact that the property is overgrown with weeds and debris, and the owner has failed to bring the property into compliance for at least several months now. I have issued violation notices to the property owner as well as a citation which the owner has not paid. Also, I've had correspondence with the owner through email and by phone, which he just refuses to bring the property into compliance.
What is his rationale?
He just doesn't feel that the weeds are in a condition where he feels he needs to remove them.
Okay.
And as you can see in the pictures that I went by today, and the weeds are worse than they were before, and they just need to be removed.
Right.
And that is gravel there, and the weeds shouldn't be in the gravel. You can't see the gravel because the weeds are just so overgrown.
So, yeah, I was going to say, there's gravel there. I can't tell. So he's just, a commercial property owner who doesn't want to
Right.
do?
He just doesn't want to comply. I think he has the means to comply, but I just don't think he wants to comply. And we have tried to get voluntary compliance and work with him the best we possibly can to where we get to this point. But I feel we're at a point to where we need to clean it up for him.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a member of the public wishing to speak on agenda item number 4, the Smith property? I don't see anyone. I agree with you, given the state of the property in the photograph today, as well as the other ones, that it is in need of abatement. And so I'm going to approve your 180-day open abatement for the property located at 209 West Southern, contained in application CM 190783.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a request for abatement of public nuisance items at the Van Egmond property. This is located at 1620 East William Street, and the applicant is the City of Tempe. Mr. Heredia.
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to request that we maybe review the property on Garfield first, being that that particular property owner is not present here today, but the property owner for the Williams property is here.
You mean Van Egmond?
Yes, he's here today.
Oh, for the
But I just
Williams
like to
Street.
go over the one where
Oh,
there
okay.
isn't a presence.
So just take them out of order?
Yes, if
Okay,
possible.
sure. So then we're going to jump ahead to agenda item number 6, which is a request for abatement of public nuisance items at the Arizona Instant Funding LLC property located at 114 East Garfield Street. Mr.
Excuse the
Heredia.
confusion, and thank you so much for the consideration.
Sure.
My name is Hector Heredia. I'm a code inspector for community development code enforcement, approximately 7 years. I am here seeking a 180-day open abatement approval on the property 114 East Garfield Street in the jurisdiction of the City of Tempe. This particular case was initiated roughly 1 week to the year in 2018. There has been a change in ownership, and at the discovery of the second owner, once it was transferred over, issued notices, communication was never initiated, nor was corrective action. The photos prove from today, comparing to when the case was initiated for abatement, that nothing has changed, and that's why I'm seeking for the 180-day open abatement approval. The property has subsequently been vacant this entire time. It is completely open, overgrown, and a completely deteriorated roof.
Were they in the middle of a roofing job?
We did have so the first property owner did try to comply and conform with our request. They only did have to work to maybe confuse me, because I do not drive through alleys. So when I pulled up to the property, it was cleared. The deteriorated roof was completed from my point of view, and the case was subsequently closed. Within a week's time, it was reopened, clearly outlining that an anonymous complainant had forgotten to verbalize that it was the entire roof, front and back. On my third inspection of the property is when I noticed that only half the portion, the front portion, was completed, and the entire back portion was completely deteriorated, with the materials lying throughout the entire backyard.
And what's going on with the plywood structures? Are those, were they permitted structures? They look like
I'm
they're-
not sure if the owners had constructed a rudimentary type storage facility to house their material, but it was never completed. Nothing was ever completed at the property, as plainly seen in the photos, and not exactly sure at this point what exactly is going on.
Yeah, because, I mean, I can't imagine those were permitted, through the building permit
Okay.
system, and also it looks like it's encroaching into a side yard
Yeah.
setback.
Yeah, so it is right on the wall as well, correct?
Yeah, so this whole property has issues. Nevertheless, I agree with you, the condition has only deteriorated, not improved, from the photographs that were in my packet. Excuse me, my tablet timed out. So is there any member of the public here today wanting to speak on agenda item number 6? I don't see anyone. I agree with you. I think this property is in dire need of abatement and remediation. And if I could give you longer than 180 days, I would, but that's the limit that's imposed on me. So I'm going to grant your 180-day abatement request for the Arizona Instant Funding property located at 114 East Garfield Street, contained in application CE 188434.
Thank you.
So now we're going to jump backwards in the agenda to agenda item number 5, which is a request for abatement of public nuisance items at the Van Egman property located at 1620 East William Street. The applicant is the City of Tempe, and again, Mr. Heredia.
Good afternoon. As previously stated, my name is Hector Heredia, Code Inspector for Community Development Code Enforcement Department, approximately 7 years. I am here seeking for a 180-day open abatement at the property 1620 East William Street. And this is regarding basically anonymous complaints regarding a deteriorated landscape and an overgrown palm tree in the backyard that is visible from several public access points, including Williams, Cedar, and there's one other road. Well, mainly Cedar and Hudson. Excuse me, Williams and Hudson as well.
Okay.
This case was initiated back on 4/19. Several notices were issued to the property owner. Not enough corrective action was taken to comply with our request as stated in the notices, and subsequently a citation was issued and found responsible for. Since that particular incident where Mr. Eggman, the property owner, was found responsible through the court, nothing other than some minor front yard landscaping has taken place. At this point, my main focus is taking care of the overgrown palm tree that can be seen, that could be seen in the photos directly above the front door in that photo.
Right. Okay, and so those photos were from this morning,
From this
correct?
morning, correct.
Okay, yeah, if I can have those, because it was flickering up there. Thank you. The vehicle and the camper, are those registered? Or
Yes, those
okay.
are in compliance, and my only concern is with the palm tree in the backyard. Mr. Eggman has been able to take care of the front yard landscaping, although I am mainly concerned with the perimeter of the front yard. That is where the concern stems from, and not the center portion where there is a decorative or designer type grass. But at this point, that particular portion of the violation has been eliminated and mainly focused on the overgrown palm tree.
Well, I'm confused, because none of this looks like it's in compliance.
Unfortunately, the grass is under the 12-inch height limit.
And all this stuff?
Yes, it is. The deteriorated portion of the bush will be taken care of with the palm tree and the approval of the 180-day abatement.
Okay. So, are you gentlemen here for this case?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Heredia.
Thank you.
So now I call to the public, or if you're the property owner, if you can stand up and state. Okay, I need you to address. Okay, hold on, time out. Can you stand up and talk into the podium? This is for the public record, so they have to be able to record what you're saying. And if you have exhibits,
My
you can
name
hand
is-
them to the staff for your,
My name is Warren Van Egmond. I'm the owner of this property at 1620 East William Street. I wish to contest all of the charges, or the, whatever you call them, the process of abatement against this. I have several exhibits and records, and would need some time to set up if you could grant me
okay.
a few minutes.
What sort of
And
technology
also
do
to
you need?
establish exactly what the procedures are for submitting the exhibits, showing them to you.
Okay, well, this isn't a court of law, so we're
and I
not
also have
following.
to, excuse me, I also have to turn this on so I can hear what you're saying.
Okay, this isn't a court of law, so we don't have numbered exhibits. We don't have to admit them into evidence the way you would in a courtroom. What you would do is hand your exhibits to the staff. There's the screen behind you where I can see exhibits, and as you've seen in the prior cases, if there's printed material, they can also hand them to me so that I can take a look at them even closer if you feel like the screen is insufficient for my review.
Okay.
So if you have exhibits, if you had a PowerPoint, possibly.
No, I just have paper photographs.
Okay,
and
so
like
if you
that.
want to
But
hand
If you
them,
could give me some time, grant me some time to sort them out.
okay,
You want to sit on this side, maybe? Does the clerk want me to fill out one of those forms there?
you can do that later before you leave. You don't have to take the time to do it now.
I'll not be presenting all the photographs at once. I'll deliver them as they become needed. By the way, since this isn't a court of law, how would you like me to address you?
Hearing officer McDonald.
Madam Officer or something like that?
Just hearing officer McDonald.
Hearing officer.
Yeah.
Hearing officer. First of all, I need a clarification because I have difficulty hearing. Is it my understanding that the inspector has dropped all the charges regarding to the front yard and the grass and the bush, and just the general complaint that it is overgrown?
I was going to say, why don't you go ahead and give us your presentation, and then
Well,
I will have the
my presentation is geared to answer all of the charges that, or all of the, well, what the right word is, charges.
violations.
That the claims that the inspector has made against my property since last February, the initial complaint was dated January 30th. I received it, of course, during February. And there have been numerous complaints back and forth, letters between me and him, mainly concerning, which boil down to two things: complaints about vegetation in the front yard and complaints against about the palm tree in the backyard. Now, I thought I heard him say that he had no further complaints against anything in the front yard, in which case, well, it frees me from answering all the,
Just go ahead with your presentation. I'd like to hear it in its entirety, because I can grant a 180-day open abatement for this property, which means if 5 months from now, there is deterioration and in your landscaping, he will be...
well, you're missing my point. My point is...
No, my point is, go ahead and make your presentation. After you sit down, I will have the applicant come back up and address any comments. This isn't a dialogue between you and them. It's your presentation to me.
Well, it would save a lot of time. You said this is not a formal legal procedure, so it would save a lot of time if I knew exactly what I'm supposed to address.
Just give me your presentation. I'm not in a hurry. I don't know how much time you're planning to take here, but
First thing I would like to say is that everything that the inspector has said about me, my property, the supposed violations of my property, my response to the property, my care of the property, and even what happened in court is incorrect. My name is Warren Van Egmond. I've lived at that property for 30 years. I've cared for it myself. It is an irrigated property. I handle the irrigation myself. I do all of the yard work myself. I've worked very diligently over the 30 years to create the type of landscape that is best suited for this type of environment and for this irrigation. This is flood irrigation, which comes every 2 weeks during the summer and once a month during the winter. So I have ample water supplies, and I am able to develop the yard to its fullest. I take great care in it. I take great pride in it. I recognize that some people may not see it as well cared for, because it is so different from the standard American yard and the types of yards you see throughout the city of Tempe and even on this same street. I think the most disturbing, okay, first of all, the inspector may have given the impression that I did not respond to all of the notices that he sent me. The fact is that I responded to all of them. I repeatedly asked for his response. His initial claims were very confusing and unclear to me. So the first thing I did was ask for clarification. Let me read the, let's see, oh, I have that one here, I think.
how did you respond? Was it by telephone? Was it by
I'm
email?
sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Oh. How did you respond when you were given notices of violation, either through the mail, and you say you responded? Was
copy
it
of it.
through
I have-
email?
I have a copy of that,
Okay.
if I can find it. I can give it to you as a document if you wish.
Either way,
Have a copy.
you can hand it to,
Well, I'll give you a copy of all my correspondence with Mr. I never know how to pronounce that.
Heredia.
Heredia. So the first complaint was issued on, dated January 30th. I did not receive it, of course, early February. I responded in writing with a letter on dated 12 February, which says this letter is written in response to case number. I respond to the 3 issues cited as follows in no particular order. One of the items was the camper in the driveway. I responded that he listed on that first issue. The camper is in code and has been determined, as has been determined by multiple rulings in Tempe Municipal Court on this very issue over the past 20 years or so. Please review the file on this property.
Okay, so the camper's not an issue. We already
Right.
established that.
The palm tree with dead fronds is in the backyard and not visible from public property, and therefore is not covered by the code. I discussed this matter with a previous inspector, who is Mr. Glad, who is left. Or you go, Mr. Glad.
Okay,
You're not?
don't speak to the audience. Speak up here.
I was just trying to identify if he was still here. And his supervisor, that was Michael Spencer, several years ago, and it was agreed to leave it as it is. Again, please review the file on this property. So the issue with the palm tree had already been resolved.
Well, I'm staring at pictures from
He is
today.
resolving it. He is redoing it.
Well, can you put your hearing thing in?
I'm sorry again.
My question about the palm tree is you state that it's in the back of the property and therefore not visible, but yet I'm staring at pictures taken from your front yard where the palm tree, the dead palm tree, is clearly visible.
I will come to this issue in great detail if you wish to, if you can wait.
Okay.
As for the landscaping issues, I confess I am completely mystified when you write, please water your front yard vegetation to bring it back to a living state. This is an irrigated lot, and it was just fully irrigated in mid-January and will be again in mid-February. Everything in my front yard is living and is in the state it would normally be during the dormant winter months. Apparently, Mr. Heredia had the impression that Bermuda grass, which turns brown in the winter, was dead. It was therefore dead and would have to be removed. In the court hearing, I asked him if he also felt that the pecan trees, which also lose their leaves in the winter and were therefore bare, would also be considered dead and have to be removed because they were dead or dying. To my surprise, he did not say no. He didn't say yes, but he did say no, not so. Also, when you say, please remove all grass, it sounds like you are asking me to turn it into a xeriscape, which is clearly not. If you have any remaining issues during your reinspection, please be more specific about what you want me to do. In his second notice on February 14th, he did not make any changes whatsoever. He did not clarify anything about the grass or the irrigation. He simply repeated exactly the same text. I believe whether you have that text or not, it was on the website as the thing. So I responded on February 26th, since you have refused my request to clarify the particular problems in my yard at 6 to 7, I have been forced to ask the manager of Code Compliance Division, Mr. Tamulevich, to set up a meeting between yourself, myself, and Mr. Tamulevich or your immediate supervisor in order to clarify what actions you feel are so necessary. And then I just little conclusions. Then I have a long letter to Mr. Tom Ulevich, dated also February 26th,
Okay,
in which I detail all of these complaints.
okay, I get your
You're
point
getting the
that you
point?
have, I understand that you have responded in writing back and forth with code compliance with Mr. Tamulevich and also with Mr. Heredia. We don't need to go through each of those documents. You know, I understand you've made your point. What I'd like to jump forward to is,
I just want to say that for all of the citations he issued, there's one more important thing I think is worth noting, is that Mr. Tomulevich did not respond to my request for a meeting or to set up a meeting. Since I'm hard of hearing, he offered to have Mr. Heredia come and stand in my front yard and show me what to do, but since I'm elderly, I have hearing problems, I have a bad hip that sometimes gives me pain to stand on, and I requested a meeting in their office so I could clearly understand everything and they could detail exactly what they wanted me to do in specific areas of the yard. They steadfastly refused to do that and still refuse to do that. They have never agreed to meet with me in an office setting and clarify what they want me to do, other than the obvious thing about the palms. After that, on April 1st, I sent a letter to Mr. Weaver, Chad Weaver, the Director of Community Development who oversees code compliance, and Mr. Tomulevich, detailed all of this and asked for him to review the case and report to me whether he felt they were acting fairly. Apparently something was going on because nothing happened between the date of my letter, April 1st, and May 15th, when I received the notice, another notice, asking me to, again, repeating exactly the same thing. So basically, even Mr. Weaver himself completely ignored me, completely ignored my request, did not instruct Mr. Tomulevich to meet with me or contact me. He just told Mr. Heredia to go ahead and cite it and take me to court.
well, we have clearly established procedures in the city, and I believe, you know, that's why we're here today, because
Right.
for nearly a year now, code compliance has been trying to follow their established procedure. They've given you notice after notice after notice. I'm looking at a notice dated September 26th, notice of
Well, we're
intent to
jumping-
abate public nuisance
You're jumping
items.
ahead. I'm sorry, madam, to interrupt you, but you're jumping ahead. We
I
need to go to the
am
court
jumping
case.
ahead, because you're saying you don't understand, but yet clearly the violations are enumerated, dead or dry palm fronds. I don't know what's hard to understand about removing
Well, as I
dead
said,
or
I'll explain that case in great detail.
uncultivated weeds in gravel landscape or lawn higher than 12 inches. I mean, I guess my point is, I don't need to hear every
Well,
single
that was my point.
communication and response.
I'm
That's
sorry,
not what we're
madam.
here for.
My point at the very beginning was to say, I would like to know exactly what you want to know about at this point. That depends on what he is saying, what his charges are. You told me to go ahead and give me my presentation, so I'm doing that.
Okay, but once you've made your point, I get the point, and we don't have to go back and forth between letters and emails and responses. It becomes laborious after a while, and if I've understood the point, then we can move on.
All right, now the next important point is the court case. Mr. Heredia is entirely incorrect when he said in his summary that this case was brought to the Tempe court and I was found responsible on all. This is not the case. In fact, this is very important because I think this raises a legal issue as to whether this hearing is being properly held. This very case was heard in the Tempe Municipal Court, number 19 dash, and I give you the numbers, on July 11th from 2:30 p.m. till about 5 p.m. That is, it lasted for about 2.5 hours, in which he presented his case to the judge. I presented all of my responses to the judge. We covered basically all of the issues that Mr. Heredia felt were current, and which can be divided into two main parts: the vegetation in the front yard, the condition of the grass and the other vegetation in the front yard landscaping, and the issue concerning the palm tree in the backyard. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judge agreed with me regarding all of the issues in the front yard, except with the possible exception of that few singed branches in a bush adjacent to the sidewalk, which I have addressed, and for which one of the photographs I noticed was done. However, the judge agreed with the code enforcement officer that the palm tree in the backyard was in violation of the final section of 21-3B8. However, this decision contravenes, in my view, the proper legal interpretation of this statute and all previous actions of the City Council and the Code Enforcement Division.
Well, that's your view, but the judge,
Accordingly, I have a right to my view.
Okay.
Accordingly, this part of the judgment has been appealed to the Superior Court. A procedural motion to do so was filed in the Tempe Municipal Court by the owner, by me, on September 19th, 2019. The court responded with its motion on September 27th, and the matter is now, or should be now, before the Superior Court. So this is an open legal question as to whether the statute, as written, covers palm trees in the backyard or only in the front yard. In consequence of these facts, it would be improper for the Code Enforcement Division, first of all, to request abatement of any of the violations for which the court has found no fault, and second, to request an abatement on the basis of an open legal question that is currently under appeal to a higher court.
do you have a copy of that judicial order saying that they'll,
Pardon? Can you tell me what you said?
Yeah. We have a copy of the order from the court that we went to, and that's the one where we never got.
The court never gave a written order.
so how do you understand that,
We
There-
have the, what's
that
it-
they're going to be,
We had a court hearing, and then at the end of the hearing, she verbally gave her opinion as to what her rulings were, and nothing in writing ever issued.
so what did you appeal? I mean, do you have anything indicating your current court date, that it is under appeal?
Well, there are all the court documents.
Do you
and-
have any of the court documents, is what I'm asking, indicating that this case is a matter
All I'm
under?
having are the receipts and a copy of my appeal, of my procedural appeal. We have the receipts for the appeal, I do have a stamped copy of the appeal, and of course, and of the court's response.
So what was the court's response? You said you don't have any documentation, but they responded. Do you have anything from the court?
Clarify something?
Mm-hmm,
There's two different court things in play right now. The original court hearing,
I get that.
it issued nothing in writing. Warren has a receipt for the appeal he filed over that hearing.
Right.
So he could show you the stamped receipt when he gave it to the Tempe court, which is supposed to send it on to Superior Court.
Okay.
Actually, I don't have the
But-
original, I just.
But
have
my
the-
question is, he's representing that it's under advisement, that it's going to be subject to future hearings. It could just as easily be dismissed summarily
I
and
have
we
all
don't
this
know
written
that.
out if you'd like me,
There's
if
been
you'd
no
like to take.
response back.
Okay.
With all of those things that you're correct, could happen in the future.
Okay,
Nothing's been.
so you have a receipt then, but no, nothing
Yes,
beyond
there's a
that?
receipt that has been filed for appeal,
Okay,
and that's where it stands.
okay,
And we wait, obviously you have to wait for the Superior Court to do its workings.
right. Well, typically, they set a court date, they
Now, I have
provide minute
a-
entries into a
I have
docket, they set
I
it.
have a written letter to you detailing all of this, so I can give it to you if you'd
Okay,
like.
sure,
So I hand it directly?
yeah.
Basically says everything that I read.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. I'm waiting for you. Are you done with your presentation?
Oh, absolutely not. My point is that in view of the fact that this is an open legal question, you say this is not a court of law, but it seems to me it would be improper for the hearing officer, this hearing to go forward when the crucial issue is whether the interpretation of this portion of the statute is the palm tree, because it is located in the backyard.
Well, I guess,
Not covered by the code, and therefore not subject to abatement.
I guess perhaps where you might be a little confused is the fact that there can be two processes that proceed at the same time. You're taking the fact that you filed something with the Superior Court and you're saying that you believe it's an open legal question. That's not always the case, but let's just assume that it is for the moment. That doesn't negate it or deem improper anything I do here. I can still make my ruling, you will have your, appeal rights here, but I don't have to say, oh, well, he filed something with Supreme Court, therefore I don't render a decision. They're two separate processes. They can proceed simultaneously. If a decision is rendered today that you're unhappy with, as I announced at the very beginning, you can appeal that to the Board of Adjustment, after which it would also go to Superior Court, where they might merge with one another, and the whole thing could be heard in Superior Court. And they may render my verdict, they may quash it, put a stay against it, but the fact of the matter is the two processes can proceed simultaneously.
Well, as a layman, that doesn't seem appropriate to me, but.
They're different processes, different jurisdictions.
But they're doing, and they're arguing over the same issue. Now, you are basically saying that well, let me put it this way. As I see it, the Code Compliance Division took the case to the Tempe Municipal Court to decide a number of issues. The one we're focusing on right now is the proper interpretation of the palm tree statute.
No, that's not what what I'm charged with is the Tempe City Code. It has nothing to do with state statutes. I'm not here to give opinions on state statutes. I look at the Tempe City Code and the Zoning and Development Code. That's what I read at the very beginning of the hearing. That's what I'm charged with opining on today is, does your tree meet the code or does it not meet the code requirements?
But
The
that
state
is-
statute and the findings of law and everything, that takes place somewhere else.
That
And
is a-
unless I'm given a judicial order, if you walked in today with an order to stay this hearing or quash this hearing where I would have to respond to that, then I'd be happy to do that. But based on the fact that you filed something that I haven't seen, I don't know what it is, in Superior Court, and you have a receipt for that, to me, that has no bearing on what I'm doing today. So to me, the question is, the photographs that I've been given today that represent your property this morning, do I believe that they meet the code? Do I believe that you've been afforded adequate due process with all of the notices that you've been given? And going
haven't-
back to January 1st, you've, responded, yes, you weren't given a meeting, but that's outside the normal course of business for the city. So, do I think you've been afforded due process? Yes. Do I think that you have certain elements of your landscape that are deteriorated and in need of remediation at the moment? Yes.
But my point is, in coming before you, of course, is to defend my position, that nothing in my property is against the code. And this requires
Let's talk about the palm
an
tree then. If you can
interpretation
put a
of the
picture
code.
up of the
This
palm tree,
requires
please.
that you make an interpretation of the code. Now, the Superior Court,
Oh, I was going to have you put it just, oh, okay. How about this one? You can take them.
I'm just trying to save time and confusion because, well, already we had enough confusion. But if you are the hearing officer, you are the hearing officer charged with overseeing the
abatement process.
Charged with, yes, I know, the Code Compliance Division has made the claim that this palm tree is in violation of a particular section of the code. I say it is not in violation of that particular section of the code, and I have evidence. I will be presenting evidence, as I did in court, to explain why this particular palm tree is not in violation of the code.
And are you talking
Now, it
about
took
City
me-
Code
it took
Section
me-
21-3B8? Is that the code section you're talking about?
Please repeat.
I said the code violation section is City Code
I'm
21-3B8.
fully aware with that. I'm fully
So-
aware with. I've studied it very carefully.
Which is dead or dry palm fronds. What we're looking at in the picture above there, how do you think that that falls outside that definition?
It took me about a half hour in court to explain it, and I'll be glad to do the full explanation to you as well. But I'm merely pointing out it took me a half hour to explain it. Well, let me go back.
Why don't you give me the Cliff's Notes version? Why don't you?
Now, you also wanted me to give my complete presentation. Do you want me to give the complete presentation for the front yard as well? All the issues regarding the front yard and the bush? Or do you wish me to focus entirely on this?
Right now, we're talking about the palm tree. So if you can succinctly tell me how you think that these are not dead or dry
It's not something
palm
brief.
fronds.
It'll take a half an hour.
Okay, then I look at this and I see the upper, I mean, it doesn't have to be removed entirely. The upper fronds clearly are living, they're in good shape, but those that are hanging down are dead or dry. You know, if this palm tree were cared for on an annual basis, like most people care for their palm trees, you wouldn't have that issue, of the drooping dead fronds. So in my opinion, they are dead or dry palm fronds, the lower ones, not the entirety.
Very well, let's see, let me get the papers on that. Do we have any photographs? Oh, no, it's the,
Thank you. Mr. Van Egmond, if I could,
that'll come later.
let me ask you a question. What's your opposition?
What, one more?
If I may, I guess I have an overriding question. What is your opposition to having the palm tree trimmed?
The cost and the damage to my property, the surrounding property, the enormous amount of CO2 that would be produced by using power tools in order to trim this. My passion is for climate change. The issues of climate change and CO2, we've just finished the meeting in Madrid, and has been pointed out repeatedly that the climate is in serious condition.
Okay, let me stop you
Okay.
right there. I'm on board with the whole climate change story. I'm not a climate change denier. I fully understand global warming and the consequences. This is not the way to address that problem. If
It
you,
is a, well, it is a,
we have a
it is
Tempe
part
City
of the
Code.
problem.
We have a Tempe City Code that you're required to follow, that every property owner within the city boundaries are required to follow.
I'm
And-
afraid this dialogue has taken us off track. If you'd let me present my case as I did in court and as what is intended to be persuasive and will address all of your issues.
Well, I'd like
I
for you
will-
to keep
I
it
think your-
germane
I
to
think all your
the,
questions would be resolved.
I know, well, don't assume.
I can understand you're
powers of
anxious to get this
persuasion.
over with and you're annoyed with me.
No, I'm not annoyed. I'm just trying to keep it germane to the question before me. Climate change is not a question before
When
me.
you asked
I agree
me
with
what my
you.
objection is.
Let me talk. I agree with you on the climate change issue, so we can therefore set that aside. This is not the appropriate tool to fight that argument. We have a Tempe City Code. The matter before me is, does your landscaping, does this tree meet the code or not? That's the only thing. It doesn't matter to me, what your beliefs are regarding this tree or the environment. It has to do with whether it meets the code or not. And if you have a problem with the way the code is written, there are other mechanisms by which you can affect that change. You can work with the city council to see if you can amend the city
The code is written
code.
fine. The code is written fine and does not require that a tree, palm tree in the backyard be trimmed.
It requires
And
that
if
a
you'll
tree
require-
that's
if
visible
you'll let
from
me
the right
present
of
the-
way.
Present show you the code and go through it step by step, phrase by phrase, as is required, I will show you that it is not required.
Please proceed.
You're taking the initial presentation, and you're also interrupting. In other words, I feel you've already formed your opinion and are not going to be listening to my argument, but
I'm all ears. If you want to talk about the code and why this tree meets that code, I'm all ears.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything you said. What did you say?
She's prepared to hear you continue with the,
Okay.
the argument.
Okay, I've selected that passage from just to be clear, from the Tempe City Code, Chapter 21, nuisances. Sorry. Chapter 21, nuisances and property violations. Nuisances, Section 21, purpose and scope. 21.3, I also given some,
You have an extra copy.
yeah, this can go to her.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure I'm looking at the same page you are. Okay, reading section 21-3, enumerated violations, it shall be unlawful, etc. Nuisance includes any one of the following. Any landscaping visible from public property that is substantially dead, damaged, or characterized by uncontrolled growth, comma, or presents a deteriorated or slum-like appearance, semicolon. Uncultivated plants, weeds, tall grass, uncultivated shrubs or growth, whether growing or otherwise, higher than 12 inches, semicolon. Or any dead trees, bushes, shrubs, or portions thereof, including stumps, or any palm or similar type tree, that's another semicolon, or any palm or similar type tree having dead or dry fronds descending downward from the base of the lowest living frond more than 8 feet dry, more than 8 feet, and so on. So I hope you agree this is not a very well-worded statute. It runs on over for 3 semicolons and many, many commas. The controlling phrase, of course, is the first phrase, any landscaping visible from public property.
Correct.
Now, landscaping is defined in the definitions of the code. Landscaping means the combination of elements such as trees, shrubs, ground covers, vines, and other organic and inorganic material for the express purpose of creating an attractive and pleasing environment. It also, the next clause, that's unfortunately does not clarify a great deal. Deteriorated or deteriorating, deterioration is the next definition, and slum-like is the next definition. Now, I have also included,
Well, wait a minute. You skipped any landscaping visible from public property. So this palm tree is visible. I believe this was taken from the street,
This
which
is my-
is
this
a
is-
public, wait a minute, don't interrupt me, which was taken from the public street, which is public property, therefore visible from public property. I don't believe there are private streets in this subdivision. They are public. That is substantially dead, comma, damaged, comma, or characterized by uncontrolled growth. This paragraph, it doesn't have "and" anywhere in the paragraph. It's not, it doesn't have to be dead, damaged, and characterized. It can be any of those 3 things. So I look at this as a palm tree visible from the public right-of-way that is dead. The lower fronds are dead. So it doesn't have to meet all of those definitions. It can meet any of those definitions.
if you allow me to continue, the definition of landscaping just says combination of elements.
elements,
It does
yeah.
not say where.
It doesn't
However,
have to.
there is a common meaning to the word landscaping, as I have on the page of dictionary definitions. Landscape comes from the German word Landschaft, or view of the land, or land view. That is, a view of the land and all the things on it, analogous to a seascape or a cityscape. The focus, therefore, is on the land and the things on it, the vegetation, the walks, not things that are things that grow on land which are obscured from public view. To this we can look at the Oxford English Dictionary, the standard, the international standard of the English language. Page 629, volume 8, defines landscaping as a tract of land with its distinguishing characteristics and features, especially considered as a product of modifying or shaping processes and agents. Webster's also has a definition, a portion of land. So when the code says any landscaping, it means any land visible from public property that is substantially, that contains items substantially damaged or characterized, that presents a deteriorated and so on. All of these things, if you read through that section, you'll see the focus is always on land and the things on that land. Therefore, when the code says any landscaping visible from public property, it means any land visible from public property. The land on which this palm tree rests is not visible from public property and therefore is not covered by this section of the code.
Well, I disagree with
One
your
moment.
extrapolation into
Since we're going to...
Oxford Dictionary. I have a code, chapter 21, I have a definition of landscaping in that code. It's what you read to me, the combination of elements such as trees, shrubs, ground covers, vines, and other organic and inorganic material for the express purpose of creating an attractive and pleasing environment. This is the definition that I have to use. I mean, we could sit and bandy about different, Webster's and Oxford and different dictionary versions that, none of which, by the way, have been provided to me, in a document. But nevertheless, this is the definition that I'm bound to use. Given the fact that I'm supposed to interpret the code, I interpret the code using the definitions that are contained within that code.
If I may continue, this is not all of it. I have been very active in community politics and city politics. I was very interested in paying much attention with when this code was being written or revised in about 1998, 1999. I had lots of discussions with the prime author of this code, and who was then City Councilman Hugh Holman, and later became mayor, and also with many of the councilmen at the time. And I know that the original intent of including this was to exclude the Code Enforcement Division from poking into the backyards of people's property. This was specifically put in. The words were saying, we don't want the code inspectors poking around and looking into people's backyards.
You don't have to poke around in your backyard to see this tree. It's visible from the public right-of-way.
Now, I also have the fact that it has been the policy of the Code Enforcement Division to respect this interpretation of the code. Get out those photos of the two palms. And the one before it. As I pointed out, Mr. Glab, who I guess is no longer here, inspected my property 3 years ago in August of 2016, One of the issues he raised was the palm tree. I presented the same argument I presented to you, to him, and he also had a number of other issues. Those were resolved, and he agreed and testified in court that he closed the case in November, agreeing to leave the palm tree as it was.
This was 3 years ago? 3 years ago?
3 years ago.
Okay.
The pictures you have in front of you represent pictures of 3 palms, which are clearly located in the backyards of properties in this very same neighborhood. These have all been seen by Mr. Heredia. None of them, obviously, because he's walked the streets then, none of them have ever been cited. Therefore, he too respects the view, my interpretation, that the palms trees located in the backyards of a property, even if they have palm fronds visible from a public street, are not covered by the code and are not subject to citation.
Well, see,
Therefore,
let me stop you right there.
One moment.
You just made a statement, and then you made a generalization based on that statement. You said that these had never been cited. First of all, these are 3 years old, so I don't know what they
No,
look
these
like.
were taken this week.
Oh, okay. But first of all, I don't know that whether they've been cited or not, but the fact, if they had or hadn't been cited, it doesn't mean that that code inspector agrees with you that they don't need to be cited. This process begins with complaints. It's a complaint-driven process. And your property has received complaints from your neighbors, from neighbors who find your property to be in violation of code compliance. If these haven't been subject to complaints, they would not receive citations. It's not the job of the code compliance inspectors to patrol neighborhoods and point out every single violation and give them citations. That's like what an HOA would do. They respond to homes that have been complained against by other citizens, by neighbors, by other citizens of the community. So you can't say because they haven't received citations, therefore that inspector agrees with me that they're not worthy of being cited.
I'm not saying that the inspector agrees with me. I'm saying that the inspector is clearly singling out me. There is a principle of law called estoppel, that the government cannot do to one which it does not do to all. Therefore, first of all, to go back to one of your points, the anonymous complaint made against the property, we don't know whether it was for the palm tree or whether it was for overgrown, what he saw as overgrown vegetation in the front yard. So it is not, you cannot make the assumption that neighbors were complaining about the palm tree.
Well,
in terms
nevertheless, once the case is opened, then they do have the responsibility to look at the property for code violations.
Mr. Heredia's process and the process of all the code inspectors, as he testified in court, is when they get a citation for a single property, they make a tour of the entire neighborhood and cite everything they can see. Now that is in violation. Now, as a matter of fact, in the month of January, there was a complete raft. There was at least more than a dozen citations written in the Hudson Manor neighborhood for all sorts of things. Some of them were for deteriorated yards or long grass or things like that. One were for missing house numbers. Some were for palms located in the front yard. But of all those cited, and I looked on the website in February rather, of the code compliance, lists all of the outstanding complaints.
That was February, last
That was
February?
February of this year,
Okay.
9 months ago. And while my property was listed for the palm tree, none of the other palm trees which are photographed were cited and still have not been, according to my latest. Plus, I do know the owners of these properties, and they have told me they've never been cited. So clearly, the inspector is singling out this particular case, probably because he was drawn by what he felt were by the complaint about the state of the vegetation, and decided to add this in. So that was my point. So that concludes that point.
Okay, I still
Oh,
haven't
yeah,
heard
I
you,
said, so,
I still haven't heard you answer my fundamental question, why you don't believe you need to trim your palm tree. I just, fundamentally,
I told you.
well, you talked
First of
about global
all-
warming and CO2 and damage to the property.
My first point was the cost. First of all, another should point out, you can see that palm in the winter, because all the trees have fallen off the tree, all the leaves have fallen off the tree. If you'll given me a little more leeway, I'll show you a series of photographs taken from the entire length of William Street during the summer, that is, covers 9 months of the year, 10 months of the year practically, and you will see that this particular palm tree is, I want to say, not invisible to all public view except for one specific location on William Street. It's not even on William Street. So when you say visible, even if I grant your point that it is visible from public property, you have the question of how visible is it going to be. If it's invisible most of the time for most places, are you going to say it must be trimmed if it's visible from any one point on the public street?
Well, the question in front of me today is, what does it look like today? I'm not abating the property 6 months ago, 7 months ago. It's what is the current condition of the property. I've been given pictures from today where it's clearly visible from the public right-of-way, which is the landscaping as defined in the Tempe City Code, has this single element within your landscape on your property has dead or deteriorated palm fronds. It's visible from the public right-of-way. I don't know what it's going to look like in June. I don't know what it looked like this past June. But to me, that's not relevant because this case has been brought before me after 11 months of notifications, court visits, notices of violation, dialogue between you and the code compliance inspector. So it's like a snapshot that I'm given. You know, that's what I have to look at, is what is the condition of the property today? Does it meet the code? Does it not meet the code?
I want to remind you that this condition has obviously existed for a long time.
Clearly.
You say it's not today, it's been that way for at least 10 years, as long as the palm has been there. And it was accepted by Mr. Glab 3 years ago. So you're basically saying that it's all right for Mr. Heredia to decide it's against the code, and only mine is against the code, where it was okay for Mr. Glab to decide it's not against the code.
Well,
That is a inconsistency.
no, it's not inconsistent. I've not been presented with any other cases regarding any other palm trees. I can't contemplate
You have the photographic evidence.
Yeah, well, but this isn't a case. These property owners haven't been notified. They haven't been in a dialogue for 11 months, been asked to cut down their trees. They haven't gone to court. They haven't had the history that your property has.
I want to answer again your question of what is my objection. And take a little more time to consider that. This palm tree in my backyard has been there for 10 years. It's quite tall, as you can see at this point. Well, it's been there for 20 years. It reached its current height over the past 5 or 6 years. My backyard is completely enclosed by fences, trees, towering oleanders to maximum height. I have no driveway or backyard or alley access to that yard at all. There's no way anyone could bring in a power truck or extension or anything like that. They would have to cause, now I'm not sure what process the contractor who Mr. Heredia has contacted intends to use on that. But unless he can find a way to scale that tree manually, he's not going to be able to do it without causing enormous disruption to all the rest of my property. There's an orange tree right next to it. Presumably the fronds and all the refuse would fall onto the fronds. Now, I will, since this is a small place and there are only a few people hearing, I will confess to my financial condition. I was a teacher my entire life. I never made much money. The most I ever earned in 1 year of teaching was $28,000. Nevertheless, I was lucky enough to be able to purchase this property at the right time and to pay off the mortgage ahead of time. That's because I'm single and I have no family. Now, because of my low income and because I spent many years overseas, my total income, living income, is $500 a month. That comes out to $6,000 a year. The estimate on trimming this palm tree is $3,000. That is half of my yearly income. Because I am elderly and low income, the property tax on that house is less than $1,000. Again, the estimate for trimming that palm is $3,000. That's 3 years worth of taxes and half of my yearly income. That is excessive by anyone's standards. Now, if you want to, I will also confess that I did not plan to have this palm tree in my backyard. When I first moved into the property, there were no palm trees whatsoever. I thought, being naive from the Midwest, that, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have a few palm trees located around the periphery of my yard? And so they came I didn't plant them, they came from seeds which flowed in with the irrigation. And I noticed a few were growing up. As happens when you're in your yard, you don't notice things. You just do things. You work around them. You don't notice. one year, I suddenly looked up and noticed that this palm tree had gotten quite big and was very thick. It's about this big around. It's not a thin palm.
Sure.
It's a very thick palm. I'm not sure what the name of it is. And I decided, well, I don't want that, so I started trimming it. And I trimmed it as much as I could, but I didn't have a saw big enough to cut through the whole thing. I could only trim it, and I couldn't get it. No, I couldn't kill it, in other words. And I kept trimming it and kept trimming it, using ladders and extension ladders, till it got up higher than any ladder that I could reach, even with a pole saw. In the meantime, other smaller palms had sprouted, but I'd learned my lesson, and so I cut those off on the base. They were the small ones as soon as I could. Basically, it became a menace. I would like to get rid of it. If you do require the abatement, I will argue as forcefully as I can to all levels of appeal, using the basic arguments I have, saying that it is not really necessary because it doesn't bother anyone.
But clearly it
For most of the time,
does.
it's not visible from to anyone. And why spend so much money and so much time and so much CO2 to trim this palm when there's no public benefit coming from it? If you give me some time, a little extra time, you've been very generous.
Well, I know, and we got to wrap it up. It's almost 6:30. And I have,
I could read the purposes of the nuisances code.
you know what,
and
sir, I'm
None of them would
familiar.
cover a single palm that is
I'm
in the
familiar
backyard
with
that
the-
no one can see.
I'm familiar with the purpose section. And so I'm going to
There's one
ask
other-
you,
There's one other thing I'd like to mention.
okay, one other thing, because I have some letters that I need to read in the record. We
Oh,
have
that was
members-
that was my point, okay.
Okay,
I posted this notice, the notice of abatement in my front yard, so that everyone in my neighborhood could see and comment on it. I didn't realize you had some comments.
I do.
Okay.
So thank you. So
No,
you can
but
go
there
ahead and
still remains the question, what about the rest of the yard, the front yard? He requested abatement, Mr.
Heredia.
Heredia requested abatement in the thing of certain things in the front yard. And I also need a chance, if those are continued, I need a chance to respond to those as well.
Okay. I'll ask you to take a seat. And I have 2 emails, and then we have some members of the public here. I don't know if they're wishing to speak today or no. So go ahead and take a seat. And once I read these, then I'm closing the public hearing portion of the hearing. So the first one I have dated today says, and it's addressed to Shelby Meyer of Community Development. I am the chair of the Hudson Manor Neighborhood Association. We wholeheartedly support the city's efforts. Nope, Mr. Ben Eggman. Oh, okay. We wholeheartedly support the city's efforts to get Mr. Van Egmon's property back up to city code and to keep it trimmed. The association has received plenty of complaints on how bad his property looks. We have filed complaints with code enforcement ourselves. His bogus claims that he is doing this to support climate change is wrong. What cools our neighborhood is the flood irrigation we get every 2 weeks in the summer. Our neighborhood is already cooler, and that is what, with everybody else trimming their trees and bushes and mowing their lawns to make them look nice. It has nothing to do with making it look like Mr. Van Egmon's unkempt jungle. Unfortunately, when you water your property that often, it grows, but you accept that if you want to live in a flood-irrigated neighborhood. Don't be fooled by his slick rhetoric. He manipulates the evidence to get out of doing any work. It is bad enough that we have had to look at his dilapidated camper trailer that has sat in his driveway for the last couple of decades. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sir? Sir? Thank you. It has sat in his driveway for the last couple of decades that has never been used because he got the city to allow him to keep it there. Please don't allow him to keep his front yard in the overgrown condition it is now. It is a breeding ground for fleas, termites, and mosquitoes, and we don't need more cases of West Nile virus around here. 2 neighbors that I know of have already gotten it. Thank you for your time. Phil Amorosi, Chair, Hudson Manor Neighborhood Association. The second one is from Lori Nessel, and she says, I am writing in support of the natural yard of my neighbor Warren Van Edmonds, residents at 1620 East William Street. The city of Tempe invited citizens to weigh in on plans for a sustainable community. Mr. Van Egmond's yard demonstrates sustainability, and instead of being vilified and persecuted for a yard that reduces evaporation with its lush overstory, eliminates the use of noise and CO2 polluting lawn equipment, as well as the use of toxic herbicides and pesticides. Mr. Van Egmond should be hailed as a hero in the vanguard of the no-mow natural yard movement. The city should educate the public and revise ordinances to be natural yard friendly if it is serious about sustainability. Snags, leaf litter, and long grass returns nutrients to the soil and offers food and shelter for native birds and other wildlife, which in turn help control insects. Over 3 billion birds in North America have vanished, mainly from lost habitat and cat casualties. The feral cat colony across the street from Mr. Van Egmond's is the true public nuisance, but that is another story. Pesticides have been catastrophic for our pollinators, and the natural yard is a step in the right direction in providing a healthy habitat for pollinators, too. I would be heartbroken if Mr. Van Egmond loses his appeals and his yard suffers abatement. It would destroy the soothing natural oasis in a sea of clipped grass and trained bushes. And that's from a Lori Nessel at 1632 East Cedar Street. So those are the only 2 letters that I've been given. Is there any other member of the public wishing to speak this afternoon on this case? Okay, sir, you'll have to come up to the podium. Do we have the timer? Okay. You have 3 minutes to
My
speak.
name's James Allen Bankhead. I've been here since 1959.
Okay, do you have an address? We need
Yes,
your name and address.
1736 South El Camino, and I'm also a problem for the city code enforcement abatement. This man is right. The whole city, we're all going to die because you got to replace the gasoline you burn. He's doing the right thing. Because of these code enforcement, I bought 2 gallons of gasoline in the last 5 years. Well, no, 7 total. Because for a chainsaw to cut things down because they want me to cut it down. I walk by things like this, and it is cooler. I've lived here a long time. It wasn't meant to have air conditioning and hot blowing out all the time and all the stuff going on that's going on. The lake, the new lake, I love it now, but it evaporates so much water. They don't, it's not even the right color. They keep having problems with it. The whole city is a sellout. And my family owns the well rights to well number 1, and that's by Daly Park, and that was the corner of my grandparents' property, and I live a block away from there. And I've been a problem ever since they started code enforcement. And they said that when they got code enforcement, they weren't going to use it for neighbor against neighbor. But that's exactly what it's been used for. It's been used for realtors that want to sell houses and make $100,000, and one guy to flip it over. And the quality of life here is all about money. And it doesn't matter what you do. I'm busting my butt to trim the biggest tree that I've ever had doing. It's in my own yard because somebody killed it, And they killed it, I think, just because they were nice and somebody had alternative motives. I've done all the work myself. I've trimmed the trees. I've got pictures of the biggest tree. I'm sitting up there on stuff, and it's scaring me. I'm 60 years old. I met a man 92 years old that's mad about the bicycle stuff. This town was not built to be what it's becoming. It's becoming a town where you're going to have to be a millionaire to live here. And that's wrong. I have never got any money for the water. My family owns it, the well rights. And we said, well, they said to me, I was the youngest one, well, let's put the money back into the city and help things, make the parks nicer. It's like the schools. The schools were given big lots so they could be doubling as a park when the school wasn't being used. I can't take my dog into a school. I can't use the facilities and things we paid for. I knew all the people that are on the list of the lights and the stuff in this place. I went in this museum when it was brand new, and it was packed full of crap. But it wasn't crap. It was neat stuff. It was stuff. It was the history of this town. And they took it out and they got a new museum where they only put so much out.
Sir, you have 30
Okay,
seconds.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But he's
And do
right.
you-
He's
okay.
absolutely right. And I'm here because I've never got a letter sent to me, and any legal action, anything happens, I'm going to lose my property because of this stuff. Oh, because $4,900 to cut down a tree that I'm doing now, and I'm working on it, and I'm doing as much as I can. What do they want? This is ridiculous. I mean, I used to be able to go and talk to Joe Sportelli, and he'd talk to me or somebody, but people now, they don't care about the old people. Most of the old people I helped around here. I knew Clyde Laird. I knew everybody that's
I'm sorry, sir,
anything
but
here,
you have
and
3 minutes,
this is
and they're up.
wrong, man. It is wrong, and he's right.
Thank you.
You're wrong, too, because anytime you do
Okay.
that, so it's done.
You're done.
And I'm not. I'm going to leave my house because it's code enforcement. And you know what? I'll just be a lawyer, and then I'm going to shut it down. I'm sorry.
Anyone else want to talk about agenda item number? No, I shut down the public hearing portion of the hearing. I moved to public comment. Typically, the applicant, if code enforcement wants to say anything or add anything. I asked you to wrap it up, and I thought you gave closing remarks, so I closed the public hearing. Mr. Tamulevich.
Yes, my name is Jeff Tamulevich. I'm the Code Compliance Administrator for the City of Tempe. Appreciate your comments, Mr. Van Egman. I think this case is very simple. I think we have a palm tree that's overgrown in the backyard. It's very clear-cut in the ordinance in terms of why that palm tree is a violation. There's also overgrown weeds in the front yard. It's very clear by code why that violation is still existent. Any other violations in the front yard have to do with possible overgrown violation into public right-of-way. In other words, obstructions into sidewalk. I don't know if that's an existing violation today, but that's what we've dealt with in the past. And any dead shrubs or vegetation that might be in the front yard. So those are the things that we're dealing with at this time. You know, again, I think it's very simple, very clear cut. We've tried to explain this to Mr. Eggman in the past, and you know, and I'm hoping that you know, a 180-day abatement gets approved this evening, and we can move forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, sir. The way we do it is you hear from the applicant. The way the proceedings are run is you hear from the applicant, you hear from the property owner, you hear from members of the public, and then the applicant, in this instance, is the City of Tempe, so they're given a chance to respond, and then we close down the public hearing altogether, and this is when I render my decision. So otherwise, we could go back and forth, and, you know, there would never be any sort of conclusion to the case. So, no, you may not. So the issue before me today, I believe, is not the condition of the property 3 years ago in January of 2019, in June of 2019, but what it looks like today. I have pictures that have been given to me from Code Compliance that were provided to me that were taken this morning. Additionally, I drove by the site. I always do that when I have items on my agenda, so that I can have a good understanding of the surrounding context of properties, and so I can have a good understanding of what the neighborhood at large looks like. Hudson Manor is, you know, if it's not historic, it's soon to be historic. It's been, you know, kind of a gem in the city of Tempe, which I have lived in my entire life. So it's not like I'm someone new to the valley who's trying to implement new codes. I was born and raised here in Tempe. I've raised my children here. I still have my home here in Tempe. So it's a community that I care about deeply. And so I take situations like this very seriously, and I have to balance out your rights as a property owner against the rights of the community at large to have an attractive environment. You called this tree a menace. That was something you said a few moments ago. You said if you could, you would take it down because it's a menace. Well, I'm sure that's what your neighbors think of this tree and the deteriorated landscape on your property. It's, in my view, unhealthy. It's a habitat for, we know we have roof rats in this community. We know we have scorpions in this community. And it presents a danger to the community at large. And that's why we have this process. The biggest fallacy, I think, in life today is that property owners feel they can do whatever they want with their property. And that's just not the case. We live in a society, we live in a jurisdiction where our city leaders have written a code that says this is not right. And you have to maintain your property. You have to maintain your landscaping for the benefit of your neighbors as well as yourself. And if you don't see that benefit yourself, at least you're supposed to do it for the benefit of your neighbors and the community at large. I agree with code enforcement in this case that the property is in need of abatement. So I'm going to go ahead and approve the 180-day open abatement that's being sought this afternoon. As I mentioned, you have an appeal right. You mentioned you were aware of the right to appeal. I anticipate that you'll be availing yourself of that appeal procedure. But today, given the evidence that I've been given of the property today and its condition, I fully believe that a 180-day open abatement is appropriate in this case. So now that I need to read the case number, but hold on, where's my agenda? We can talk about that after the hearing. I'm going to go ahead and render my verdict, and then we'll adjourn the hearing, and then we can talk about how you do that. I did make an announcement that the appeal needs to be submitted to community development within 14 calendar days. So there's my case number. I'm approving the request, the 180-day open abatement for the Eggman property located at 1620 East William Street and contained in CE 190735. Thank you. We don't have any other items on our agenda. Staff, do you have announcements?
Just one other thing. The next hearing is scheduled for January 7th, 2020.
January 7th, 2020. Thank you. We are adjourned until then.